Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to be talking about science literacy in conservation biology, specifically. And today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Meenakshi Nagendran, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Amrita. Um, my name is Meenakshi Nagendran. I am a wildlife biologist, a conservation biologist, and a veterinarian, and a proud alum of UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. Um, I have done work for the last 30 years. Now I'm retired from active field work, but I've worked overseas and in the United States working on endangered birds and more recently helping with conservation of endangered species in Asia, providing more administrative grant support for species like elephants, tigers, rhinos, and apes, all in the wild.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. Um, Interesting. Okay. So obviously, as you can see, she knows a lot about conservation biology, which is why I asked her to do this with me. But first, the whole point of this podcast is to understand what conservation biology is and why it's important specifically today, especially with climate change and, increased population. So, my first question to you is, what exactly is scientific literacy, and why is it important that we pay attention to it right now, especially when it comes to animals and conservation?
To me, and I'll give you my perception of it, to me, scientific literacy is based on what you gain from the knowledge you get from facts as opposed to someone's personal opinions. And we all know we can have a plethora of opinions on so many things, and
Yes.
not, some of them may be based on facts, but a lot of them are based on just what we hear from someone else or, our own whatever, could be
Mm-hmm.
dogma, what have you. But scientific facts are what help us with respect to, in terms of, for example, when you see temperatures rising
Yes.
steadily over the years,
Mm-hmm.
you know that something could be amiss. And just from one year to the next, if there's a fluctuation, then it kind of tells you that it could be just it may not have anything to do with some underlying condition as much as uh, just a thing that happens, right?
Yes.
But when you start to see a steady rise and you start to see glaciers melting and you start to
Exactly.
see things that are happening, oh, well, there's
Signals.
probably more to this than just meets the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can't just say, oh, the winter was cold, therefore there's no climate change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So facts are really important, and science to me is based on facts. Of course, those could change a bit as your instrumentation of measuring gets
Yeah.
more sophisticated, right? I mean, if there are two species that look alike, and then you do the genetics, maybe you realize, no, they're very quite different.
Mm-hmm.
They are indeed distinct species and
Yes.
potentially could be different genera, even,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, yeah, facts to me are important. And especially now when you have this dramatic change in temperature, in rainfall patterns, and
Natural
uh,
disasters.
any number of those. Uh, by not looking into facts, you are not able to really help in any meaningful way. It's more of a knee-jerk reaction, which we're not really well prepared for. You can't, when something is happening, you obviously are going to react
Mm-hmm.
in a condition. But if you were better prepared, if you could anticipate it based on facts, you could probably address it in a better way. It's just similar to what you would do as a veterinarian. You've got your differential diagnosis, you
Yes.
do a whole assessment, you do take a history. Why do you do that? So you can go down the list and say, okay, it's not this, this sounds more like it. Let's see if we can address this with this.
Hmm.
But if somebody comes into the emergency room, you've got to stabilize that patient. And
Oh yeah.
that's what we're faced with. And then you start to look at stuff. Okay. So to be able to do that, you've got to have facts on to scientific literacy is really, really important. Whatever the topic is, whether it's climate change, whether it's habitat, whether it's species decline, whether, all of a sudden there's a disease outbreak.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We saw how that went in 2020. Um, so what is conservation biology to you, and why is it important that we talk about it today? Um, Specifically just conservation of wild animals.
Conservation biology to me includes humans,
Yes.
and unlike just say preservation, in conservation biology, you take the human dimension into consideration. You talk about the competition for resources between wildlife and people. You look at where there's got to be compromise. You look at what endangered species might need in this human dominated landscape, or where you could potentially work with people on creating corridors and connectivity, where you have to look at toxins in the environment. It is, there are natural toxins, but there are a lot more human related
Related, exactly.
toxins that are put in there. So it more often than not includes humans in the
Hmm.
equation, and it's really, really important, like you said, with human population explosion. It's a J curve, right? It's what
Oh
they
yeah.
call an asymptotic curve.
Yes.
So if you don't take humans into consideration, it's going to be very difficult to protect anything at all.
Yes, and you had mentioned how now because of expanded human populations, the the gap between wildlife and humans is getting thinner and thinner. And it's very important that we also take into consideration how people also rely on the environment today. It's not just about animals. I think UC Davis just started this whole thing. It's called One Health, where we look at animals, humans, plants, and the environment holistically and not just one specific, part of that because we're all connected and we need to address that before we, you know, I guess fix things, if you will. Yeah. Um, my third question is, what does modern day conservation biology mean to you, and how is it different from previous historical views? In school or currently in classes, they teach us the different, I think there's like 6 eras of conservation biology, and I wanted to know what your thoughts are on how it's changed more recently and what scientists currently focus on when they think of protecting wild species.
I think historically, conservation biology was more was closer to maybe wildlife management.
Yeah.
And to me, the the original father of conservation biology was actually the father of wildlife management. I consider Aldo Leopold. I don't know if
Yes.
you've read his
Yes.
Sand
Oh,
County
yes.
Almanac. It's just a fabulous book of amazing essays, very poignant essays.
Yes.
And
Studied him. Yeah.
yeah, and so to me, that was an era. I mean, he made the shift. I think I was starting to make the shift. It was mostly hunting. It was probably based more on the Judeo-Christian principle of these animals are there for our consumption,
Hmm.
so to speak. But it's more now in terms of, if you don't address these issues, you're going to see a greater detriment even for people. So conservation biology from that point of view it's not taking people out. It's not saying don't consume. It's saying, how do you manage sustainably? How do you keep things from disappearing? And also, just as you mentioned previously, that the gap, to me, what you mean by the gap, let me see if I understand it correctly, is the interface between wildlife and
Yeah.
people now is just really, it's basically, it's a clash. There is
Yes.
no buffer zone, so to speak,
Oh,
right?
no, no.
Because
Yeah.
we're in there
Hmm.
and they have no place. They don't go to the grocery store to go shopping. Wildlife don't go there. They have to rely on the environment.
Yes.
So when they are forced to, they're restricted in their habitat and they're restricted, they could be stressed in so many different ways. It could be stress for water, food, etc. And also by concentrating animals in a smaller and smaller area, you are exposing them to their, you know, basically epizootics. They
Yeah,
can
oh
have
yeah.
disease outbreaks and things like that. So we're not even going into that transfer of disease from one species to another as much as it's just within the species. And so basically, to me, conservation biology is, it has so many uh, facets to it, right? It's this, you have to think about habitat, you've got to think about uh, the needs of the animals, needs of people, and potentially by not having this buffer zone between humans and wildlife, you are really creating a situation where it's far easier for bad things to jump, not just human wildlife conflict in the sense of some animal clawing your eyes out, as much as some pathogen that you didn't
Oh
even know
yes.
existed, all of a sudden,
Diseases. Yeah,
scratching your eyeballs out, so to speak.
exactly.
Yeah.
That can have a more globally damaging effect.
And then from that point of view, One Health, I think, is really important. It talks about, at least in the sense I understood it when I first was exposed to it, One Health looks at, human health, environmental health, animal health, non-human animal health, and tries to make sense of it. So you can't just have your own, you can
Box.
specialize in your pillars, yes, but I think there's got to be communication between.
Yes, especially between human doctors and veterinarians and biologists and researchers, because at the end of the day, we're all studying the same thing, nature. So,
When I was in vet school at Davis, there was a great T-shirt. I think I do believe I still have it, even though it's got all kinds of holes in it by now. But it said, uh, "Human doctors treat only one species." So
that's
it
hilarious.
had a whole bunch of different species. It was really cool. So
Interesting.
yes, it's really important to understand. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, back to the whole historical views thing. I actually took a class on marine environmental issues, and my professor was like a guest lecturer from I think NOAA. I don't remember exactly which government body that studies marine biology because there's so many. And he basically said that now there's more of like an ethical view to how we treat animals and plants. Back then, ecology meant a random guy just going on an island and like sawing through like islands and just like killing animals for like taxidermy. And he made us laugh, but the sad part is that was probably true. So I guess there's more of like a holistic and ethical view. Would you say that?
I think ethics does play a pretty big role these days, and I think social science also has, and behavioral sciences have a bigger role, yes, than they used to in the past,
Um, that's
which
what,
is a good thing.
oh yeah.
Not bad, yes.
Um, it's important that we think about ethics and how we treat
Yeah.
for species, I guess. Um, and in terms of science literacy on a global scale, where do you think the major gaps lie when it comes to connecting ordinary people to scientists or just understanding research? Or what exactly like people do in a lab? Like what does it mean to be in a lab?
I think communication, that's a very good question. That's always been an issue. And it's pretty much in a lot of sciences that scientists don't really write things for the non-scientific community to understand. You're doing your methods, your analysis, and your
Mhm.
data. You're speaking, you're writing for your fellow creatures, right? So you're looking at literature published and you're seeing what have they done. Do I repeat that, or does it make sense? It's not the non-scientist who's reading it to say, do I understand this? Is this making sense? So I think there's still a very great need for that language to be translated to something that's very palatable to the general public.
Yes.
more like storytelling,
Yes.
but with facts, and make it sound as though, you are feeding good information to people that is important. And that worldwide, that is a huge problem and continues to be a problem.
Exactly. Especially with the rise of social media now, anybody could just go on Instagram or Facebook and type
And
whatever.
you could have some good facts there, but a lot of times it's just junk. Sorry. I mean, when people say I have the internet I can go to, and so do I. I mean, but when I go to the internet, I'm actually going to sites that I know are reliable. So if I'm looking for, somebody who's been diagnosed with something, you can find all kinds of garbage on the internet,
Oh
or
yeah.
you can go to a medical, hospital site, and then they'll give you the list. And then obviously they don't give you everything,
Hmm.
but they give you enough that me as a scientist then can go chase after it in published literature. But for the average person, they should be able to go to a site that, and not just go to what their cousin or uncle likes, right? And be able to get that information in
Hmm.
a way that's reliable,
Yes.
not some snake oil medicine kind of thing, right?
Yeah, that is so true.
Yeah.
And this is important especially with the younger generation because
Yes.
I think my generation and Gen Alpha were more accustomed to using Instagram for some reason. I was on TikTok the other day and somebody is giving like medical diagnoses
Oh
on
gosh.
like something like pretty serious, which you should be going to a doctor for, which is a little scary. And also speaking of major gaps, they don't even have like the ordinary like public doesn't even have access to proper tailored studies, reading studies. A lot of that is restricted or you have to pay for it. Luckily, I'm still a university student, so I have access to ResearchGate, Google Scholar, etc. But they probably will only be able to like read the abstract of a paper and that's it. And that also has like so much complicated like jargon which
Yes.
most people are not educated in. Um,
Yeah.
so that's something else that we hope to achieve with this podcast is go through some studies that are relevant and important today and hopefully uh, show the public or make them understand what's going on and that scientists are not just, random people wearing white coats in a lab, pipetting all day. Yeah. Um, what are the major issues regarding conservation biology that humans and animals both face? And maybe like a list, I guess. And why is it important that in the context, again, of global population expansion, especially both, that we address these issues? And how can increasing scientific literacy fix these issues in the context of global population expansion? Combining all three topics together.
So in terms of the issues that are crucial for the collective survival of all species, humans and non-humans included, food and water, right? And air, correct? So the food and water, you have water scarcity, you have basically um, animals and non-human animals, human animals and non-human animals, if they don't have access to water, they can't survive.
Yeah.
And we all go through these cycles of rainfall. And so during the dry seasons, everybody's impacted. Humans clearly have a better chance because they can go deeper into the aquifer or dig or do whatever. But that's not the possibility for wildlife or
Hmm.
non-human animals. But so there's that very basic survival uh, necessity that comes into play, and that becomes more severe when you have
Hmm.
competition for resources.
Oh, yes,
And
absolutely.
wildlife are not necessarily increasing, they'll come into conflict as they increase or they move out of their space because they come directly in contact with people, even if they're not attacking people. Just the presence of a huge elephant in your backyard is not exactly something. It's not like having a little poodle in your backyard. Okay?
Exactly.
So there's tremendous fear, and it's problematic in ways. So there's certainly that problem, competition for resources.
Hmm.
Then even if you didn't have a climate crisis, just a human expanding human population coming in contact and in competition with wildlife is a problem. Now compound that with all these other environmental crises, right? You've
Exactly.
got climate change, you can't really run away from floods and monsoon typhoons and hurricanes, right? What are you going to do? You can't redirect them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So you are in harm's way. So that just makes it worse. And then you've got industrialization, you've got linear infrastructure, you've got highways, you've got concrete jungles. So even if you had rainfall that could potentially replenish your rivers or replenish your aquifers or replenish bodies of reservoirs, there's a lot of times runoff because there's no way for the water to slow down and get absorbed
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
get channeled in a proper way. So think about that. Just that, wildfires could cause potential erosion just before a rainy season. You could
Mm-hmm.
just have actual deforestation by humans causing that problem. You could have then you have a severe agricultural disaster where
Yes.
nothing grows because your topsoil was eroded,
Soil
or
erosion. Yeah.
yes, and then, or you had some sort of a GMO crop that wasn't made to survive these conditions. So there are factors. Our interference has caused multiple challenges, basically things that would normally take, evolution would take eons, right,
Oh yeah.
to actually occur. But we're creating this if I may use this analogy, basically we're doing it in a test tube. That's how rapidly things are happening. And
True. Yeah.
so for for humans and for non-human animals to adapt to this rapid change is a huge challenge. For example, we've had climate change episodes before. This
Before.
is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
unique.
We
What
have
is absolutely unique about this is how rapidly it's
the
happening.
rate. Yeah.
Yes, the rate is something that even
Unbelievable.
we cannot adapt to as quickly as we would want to.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what you mean to say is that this whole idea that evolution will take care of it, it's kind of irrelevant because the rate at which everything is moving combined with all of the issues just doesn't make sense. And again, it takes thousands of years for like a single species to like evolve perfectly
Yeah,
to its, habitat, but
condition. Yeah,
conditions. But what we're doing is every day there's like a different environment that that animal has to deal with, which makes it even more harder for them to,
right,
I guess, for natural selection to happen.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even for us, I mean, you see how many
Oh
we
my
have
God.
so many wars going on,
Oh yeah.
and I would say that there's probably a lot of that has to do also with environmental
Oh yeah. Yeah.
stress.
100%.
People, yeah. So it may be somebody wants this land, and so we're going to blast it, but not every place is as depopulated as some other areas where some nut job's
Underlying
gone out
cause.
there and trying to
Yes.
conquer. But yeah, if you look at
Um,
some of these wars that have, it's just escalating this stress.
yes. That being said, also we did look at a study in one of my conservation biology classes where apparently, what is it? Poaching and hunting of wild animals in sub-Saharan Africa actually is directly correlated to terrorism and war funding, which I thought was very, very interesting. Apparently,
Yes,
most of the money actually ends up there, which is
yes,
another big issue we need to take care of.
well, that's actually been shown in many places now that wildlife are, because they really, it's easy. It's easy to kill and to make money that way. There are so many ways that it's been being done that the money that's generated from that fuels or supports other other conflicts. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I thought that was wow. That was like what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not, that was like unbelievable for
Yeah,
me.
it's happening in Asia too.
Really?
It's, yes, absolutely.
Specifically like where or
In many places in Asia.
okay.
I'm working with some individuals, and this is exactly how it's going. Yeah.
Really? Is
Yes.
it just with animals or is it also with like I guess plants? I know in India they have like a whole redwood tree issue. Not redwood, sandalwood
Sandalwoods.
tree. Why did I
It's
say that?
it's with animals too. Yes, you've got tigers, you've got rhinos, you've got pangolins. Pangolins are the
Oh,
most poached
pangolins. Okay.
animal. So it's there are drivers to this, and basically there's a market, and there are poverty itself is clearly not the reason why we have poachers, but it's very easy for those people who are living in abject poverty. If somebody says, I'll give you $100, go get that black rhino or white rhino or kill that elephant. If somebody kills that poacher because they did that, there's somebody else behind who
Oh
can do
yeah.
the job. Not that they want to do it, but if they have to put food on the table, they're going to do it, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
the middleman or the middle person makes a lot more money, and those middle persons could be those who are providing support for terrorists or just insurgents or just some kind of war situation, maybe legal, maybe illegal, but these transactions are pretty commonplace now.
That being said, also we did look at another study where in areas of poverty, when there was some sort of conservation attempt to protect wildlife and I guess also like the surrounding forest areas or when certain areas were reforested, in the short term, those people did experience more economic hardship, but in the long term, a lot of people actually were able to come out of poverty because they found a more sustainable means of living off of the forest, which was also very fascinating. So it just goes to show one health, one world. If we protect or do something for nature, then we're going to be benefited too. Yeah.
Well, yes, we are going to be benefited, and I think it takes a lot of effort to
Oh, yeah,
see how these people can benefit in the short term as well, so you can have advocates.
that is true.
Yes.
Instant results are motivating. You need an incentive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Interesting. So my next question was you had mentioned that you were also a veterinarian, and I wanted to know what your opinion is on how can veterinarian medical professionals make an impact on this new narrative of conservation biology?
You can be part of a team. Veterinarians can be part of a wildlife team if there's no need for a veterinarian to be part of a wildlife team. For example, it may just be, we need you to come and capture these animals, or they say that we can't support you otherwise for the whole project. Perhaps you train someone on certain things previously. For example, veterinarians weren't involved necessarily in darting wildlife. You had wildlife biologists do that. And actually, in many states in the United States, they don't have veterinarians as part of their staff necessarily. So I think it's more a case of being willing to share what you can, being willing to uh, provide dosages where it's possible. Obviously, if you need a veterinarian and there's something you cannot do in the absence of veterinarian, then engage with people. You can't say, sorry, this project can't go forward unless you have a veterinarian, but a veterinarian maybe needs to approve something.
Hmm.
So that those are important aspects, and sharing knowledge, sharing experience, not coming off really strong and saying your project absolutely requires a veterinarian at all times, because that would just really turn off people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did find a study on the crucial contribution of veterinarians to conservation biology by Redding et al.
Yeah. I
The
read that
paper. Yes.
abstract. Yeah.
So they did actually mention three major areas in which vets can offer great assistance, and that was again participation in wildlife capture, leadership organizations addressing health issues, especially now there's more of a what is the word for it? More of a focus on herd health, both in
Yes.
domesticated and non-domesticated species, and also leadership or assistance in addressing wildlife disease issues, especially when it comes to zoonotics. Um,
I
and
think it's also really important to look at uh, disease transmission between species, where it's not just from non-human animals to humans, but look at disease transmissions between wildlife. For
Oh yeah.
example, rabies from dogs to a healthy herd of, say, um, wild cats,
Mhm.
or we had a I was when I was working in government, we supported a project of Ethiopian wolves that were being affected by rabies.
Oh.
And so there was, oral vaccination. How do we get that to make sure you
Yeah.
inoculate the wolves and then also make the wild feral dogs
Hmm.
uh, or community dogs to vaccinate those. And so there was a huge study there that we supported.
Awesome.
So you've
Um,
got to look at that. And then Chytrid, for example, Chytrid coming
oh,
into
the
frogs in
fungus.
the US.
Yes.
Yes. And so basically, there are lots of things to look at.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, you mentioned animal to animal. I just talked with a California Department of Fish and Wildlife fish veterinarian. And he works with Davis on sturgeon projects. I actually used to work in that lab and it was
Oh,
fun.
neat.
Yeah. Anyway, so he was mentioning how there's like this specific parasite that affects, I think, Chinook salmon. I forgot which fish species it was, but because a lot of their what is it? Fish stocks are bordered or like on the sea or like a riverbed, it's very easy for the disease to jump from the
Yeah.
fish that we have in our area to wild fish that are in the stream, and that's
Yes.
going to be a really big issue. Yeah.
It's for a lot of species like that. And then you've got, for example, Toxoplasma gondii
Yeah.
from feral cats going
Yes, yes.
into, so you have to think about how you're going to get rid of feral cat colonies.
Yes.
There's this, so how do you address that, right? I mean, there's
Um,
washout of this and you have marine mammals dying from it.
mhm,
How sad is that,
mhm.
right? So I think there are lots of things like that veterinarians can play a huge role.
Yes. You had mentioned feral cats. I actually just had an internship at the Davis Shelter Med department. There's ladies who literally capture a bunch of feral cats, and they just started the Shelter Med program here. We basically do what is it? We vaccinate them and then we spay and neuter them and then we release them back into the wild. So that seems
And
to be
there's
actually helping a lot.
it helps with the population
Yes.
control, right? It doesn't necessarily help with the devastation to
They
wildlife.
do
But
eat
yeah,
and kill a lot of prey. But it does help with population control and
yes, and I think you've got to
disease
address it
control.
somewhere. Yeah,
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah. And also back to the whole herd health thing. My PI in the lab I work at right now, she's also a veterinarian. We work on bovine fertility and reproduction. But she actually was a wildlife biologist first, or I think that was one of her interests. And her whole agenda is how can we use vetmed or like advanced fertility techniques to save endangered species like rhinos. And I never really thought that we could do that. I thought that was interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, cool.
yeah. But yeah, that's the new research that's been going on, I guess. What are some issues you see in the United States specifically, when it comes to literacy on climate change, habitat decline, and how is it important that we in the scientific community bridge this gap? I mean, the United States is very diverse, but I guess also compared to the rest of the world, everyone has like their own issues, but specifically in the US, what do you see is happening, when it comes to
I
these?
th I think there's still a large percentage of people who don't believe that climate is an issue.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And and to to address that, I believe there's got to be more, again, communication for the average person, not just sound bites, but actual literacy that informs them that this is a problem, and showing how things have gone and where it's going possibly,
Mhm.
and how it would. And a lot of folks probably feel it's not going to happen in my lifetime, I'll be fine, so why
Yes.
do I care? But I think we all need to care about the future generations that many of us leave behind, right?
Yes. Oh
And
yeah.
maybe
We're
I don't have children, but
responsible.
yeah. So don't leave them degraded, scorched earth. And so that is really important. Creating more empathy,
That's very true.
and
Yeah.
how you do that with actual facts, with scientific facts, is really important. Um, Literacy, again, there are lots of people with lots of opinions, but I think putting science or scientific language in a palatable manner that people read, and making it into newspapers or publications that the average person buys at the grocery store, which may not sell, but I think because it doesn't have the shock and awe type of stuff. But I think maybe working with popular uh, icons, I guess, or
Celebrities, yes.
celebrities,
Yes.
that kind of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
A
that's
lot of
helpful.
a lot of celebrities in the US actually do believe in climate change. A lot of them work with the government and to create some sort of awareness from
Yeah.
at least what I've seen.
And
Um,
the other thing too,
yeah.
I think is, I've seen a lot of folks say, yes, you can become a vegetarian and you'll have less of a footprint. It's fine. I can be a vegetarian. I can be a happy vegetarian,
Yeah.
but I don't know that you can impose that upon
No.
300 million people or
That's
so. But I think what is really quite detrimental, and this, the veterinarians who are involved in factory farms will not appreciate this, but factory farms are breeding grounds for a lot of poor health for the environment, and for the herd, and for the people.
like meat factories is what you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about just, you talk about these large herds that are put into confined areas, and
Oh yeah.
large poultry farms, large cattle farms, cattle.
Yeah.
No, these are not free ranging cattle, right? They're stuck in a
Confined.
confined area. And so uh, it's easy to manage in terms of, you go out there, you inoculate the herd, but it causes such a huge impact on the environment.
Hmm. Um,
So
Going off of that, you had talked about sustainability in certain aspects. What do you mean by sustainability? Um,
sustainability to me is, for example, if we live in an area here where we're reliant on our aquifer to feed us water, to get us water, both agriculture and human consumption. Okay. And our aquifer is being degraded by intrusion of salt water from the
mm,
ocean.
yes.
Okay. And the reason that's happening is because consumption is more than replenishment. It's
Hmm.
just literally like putting a jug of water in your fridge. If you don't fill it up, it's going to get empty.
Yeah.
So if we're not using things sustainably, we have a lot of the powers that be don't believe that there's a problem. If the chloride's increasing, the nitrites are increasing, the nitrates are increasing, but yet they say it's not a problem. They're going to construct more homes. So how do you do that and not think about, is it sustainable?
Hmm.
You have to address those issues before
Yes.
you can start building, because otherwise you're just going to create, all of us can't just say, okay, I'm going to take a shower once a week and I'm going to use the shower water to water my garden. Everybody does that, or a lot of people do it. But then because you do it and you're helping with the aquifer situation, now are you going to build 500 homes there? Because now all of a sudden your aquifer is starting to look
Yes.
healthy because people are doing their part. But people are going above and beyond to do their part. So they want to get their aquifer healthy. They're not doing it to make life more difficult for themselves,
Hmm.
right? So from that point of view, we consume a lot more than we're willing
Yes.
to pay attention to our environment. We feel that I can afford it, therefore I should be able to have it. And of course, when you look at the disparities around the world, the haves and the have-nots, there are a lot of people who are literally starving.
Hmm.
And I can't help somebody 10,000 miles away
Yeah.
necessarily, perhaps, but I certainly can be cognizant of my immediate environment and consume less,
Hmm.
right? So
That's true.
that's what I'm saying. If we all consume less, just because we can afford it doesn't mean we should have it,
Hmm.
right? Do you need a 2 pound steak for a meal?
No.
So
Awareness, I guess, also goes
yeah, I
hand in hand
think
with
there's so
sustainability.
many things. Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of things. And
Like something simple like turning off the shower when you're putting on soap.
yeah, or
Yeah,
turning off your lights,
exactly.
right? And I think it typically hits people when it hits their pocketbook.
Yes, that's
That's
true.
a real serious driver. Yeah,
I mean, isn't it good? Like if you turn off your lights, you get less of an electricity bill. That should
right.
motivate people, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think people do that with respect to food, though,
No,
unfortunately.
no,
So,
that is true.
yeah, they feel that if they're paying $10 for a meal, they need to get, like
$10 worth.
or more, whatever. But yeah.
Okay, that is very true actually. I've seen that myself. And
Mhm.
I mean, we talked about celebrities and how they do play a part. I don't know if you saw the news, but some celebrities uh have been questioned when it comes to their usage of their private planes. I don't know if you saw this on the news. Not gonna name them, but some celebrities apparently have been using their private jets to fly like 33-minute flights from like LA.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so there it's nice that the public cared and called them out on it, but they do have like a very they do have a very strong influence on younger generations.
okay.
Especially what people look up to. Yeah, that's not sustainable.
But that's probably, yeah, yeah.
Yep. What do you hope to achieve with this podcast, if I may ask?
Boy, to me, if your plan is to do more podcasts and get people to speak to the topics of, science literature and make it more readily palatable and available to the general public,
Hmm.
and also amongst your own peers,
Yes.
you all figure out how to convey the message in a manner that is, that you can convince people that, yes, pay attention to this, and just don't go off of what the next person says,
Mhm.
and just think about something before like buying food, for example, with everything's wrapped in plastic, and it's shocking to see how much plastic is out there. But do we need to do something on our part? I've been called a bag lady because I've got lots and lots and lots of cloth bags.
Yes.
But
Me
so
too.
I think it's really important to bring your own cloth bags to the grocery store, right? I know
Exactly.
California set the trend, but I think it's okay to care for your environment. There's nothing wrong with that. There's
Yeah.
absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Hmm. Um,
And I think if your podcast gets to that point where it starts to even influence one or two or three people around you, that's great.
could make a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I hope to achieve with this podcast is again making science more available to people in
Yes.
more less techy sense, if I may, like in the less scientific jargony, difficult to understand.
Yeah. Keep the jargon out of it.
Yes. Or
And
maybe even explaining what the jargon is.
yes.
Um, and I do hope to bring on some researchers to talk about what they're doing and how it's important for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I would suggest too, if you're talking to researchers who use jargon, that you try and figure out a simpler way.
Hmm.
Maybe you ask them to explain what that
Yes.
means during a podcast. That would really help, because I know when I was in practice, I would have, clients say, "What does that mean?" And I would take a minute to explain what it means,
Hmm.
because that is really important. The dog or cat is not going to ask you that question, but the person that brings in the pet
Yep, the client.
wants to know, right? So I think it's really important for veterinarians to embrace the fact that if you're going to be in a clinical setting, you're going to be talking to the farmer or the poodle
owner.
owner or what have you, and just take a minute to explain it to them,
Yes, absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Yes. So I just wanted to say thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.